Welcome to the Unwashed Asses, episode 66, recorded for Wednesday, December 19th, 2018. Oh, the soul. The soul still burns. I've got nothing. I mean, we can make the obvious jokes about having the clap and, actually going. But I feel that we're above that. We're well beyond such juvenile humor in regards to talking about such petty lines from Soulcalibur. Soulcalibur! Ah! I love it. At least I think I do. It was... it's one of the series that stuck with me the longest when I think about games in general. Even things like Resident Evil and Final Fantasy, which I had started playing before, later entries have kind of fallen off, and I've not been super keen on them. Like Resident Evil after... Sorry, cough is still ever present. Resident Evil 5 was like the last entry I really cared about. I have 6, haven't even touched it. 7's just too scary. The remake, it just goes on and on. Final Fantasy, everything after 12 is just trash in my opinion. But Soulcalibur has kind of stayed the course. There was a really long time where we had a stretch of no games, no real content. The best we had was a PSP title and then a Wii title, which the Wii title got slammed in reviews, and this was after Soulcalibur V, and we weren't even sure that we were going to get another one. But, how many years... we can do some Google foo here. Head over to the Wikipedias for some excellent podcasting here. Soulcalibur video game series. All right, so... Soulcalibur V we had in 2012, so 6 years later we finally got another one. And that's what we're going to be going over today is how does it stack up. But as I like to do with everything, let's go into the history. Let's delve into it. Soulcalibur began with a game called Soul Edge in 1995. I had seen it a lot in arcades. By arcades, I mean I saw it in the entryways to Walmarts. It was one of those arcade cabinets that was just fucking everywhere. I don't understand, why it was so popular, or I should say I didn't at the time. I had played a couple games, but it didn't really take hold because to me it was an arcade game. Sure, it's fun to play, but I was much bigger into like Mortal Kombat at the time. But Soulcalibur, when the series rebranded itself, came out for arcade, and then Dreamcast was where I got introduced to it. It was late into the Dreamcast life cycle, so I probably picked it up around 99, 2000. This was shortly before PS2 had come out. I jumped onto the Dreamcast bandwagon because they weren't going to be making them any longer, and Toys R Us had a bitchin' deal, so I got the Sega Sports Bundle. So I got like NBA 2K and NFL 2K and like the original ones before they started going like 2K17. Loved my Dreamcast. It was easily one of my favorite consoles. And a big part of that was due to Soulcalibur. This was one of the first, but not the first forays I had into a 3D fighter. Tekken 3 was definitely my jam when it came to PlayStation. I got really, really into that one for whatever reason. Despite my mom just handing me my ass in an arcade. We were at a skate rink. I'm like, oh yeah, hey, come play this game. And I thought I was totally going to thrash her. So I picked Jin Kazama because he was my boy. And she picked Yoshimitsu and just proceeded to fuck my shit up. But I got it on PlayStation. Loved the hell out of it. So I had some experience with it. You still kind of face each other in that 2D format, but you can sidestep and whatnot. It added literally a whole other dimension, whereas games like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, they were all strictly 2D up until that point. So Soul Calibur, I picked it up on the cheap, much like all the other Dreamcast titles that I own, and just instantly fell in love with it. I remember one of the first days I had it, I brought my Dreamcast over to my grandparents and I was playing it. And at least in the first two games, first three actually, Nightmare was my fucking character. Nightmare, we're just going to assume you have some general knowledge of Soul Calibur, but suffice to say, he's the big bad guy for the series. And his playstyle just agreed with me. It made sense. I like big, beefy, powerful characters. Not necessarily slow characters, but, average speed, but a lot of power to them at that time. I've since migrated to smaller. They don't hit as hard characters, but they're a lot faster. But Nightmare, and I shouldn't even just narrow it down to Nightmare, but every character in there, it's all the same repetitive noises of like attacks and grunts and screams. And so the computer was just, it couldn't handle my Nightmare. That was one of the first games I was able to eventually, bump up to legendary mode and just really go to town on it. But my grandparents yelled at me, turn that down. But no, I dug it quite a lot. And even went so far as, unlock the big thing that I really enjoyed with it. It was they had this big art gallery that you could unlock, official artwork as well as fan made artwork, and so you would earn money in the game and you'd buy all the pieces. I went to the point of I unlocked everything in the game and then I deleted my save file so I could just start playing it all over again. I don't think I ever earned it all back, but I enjoyed it that much. So we then had the move to the next generation where we had our PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, and we had Soul Calibur 2 come out in 2002. And this is when we started to see the beginning of a trend where the Bandai Namco would include guest characters into the game itself. So with this one, they had console exclusives. Who was it? We had Spawn on Xbox. We had Heihachi Mishima from Tekken on PS2, and then they had Link from Zelda on GameCube. And I remember I had the PS2 at that time. I wanted a GameCube, but I was still very young, and I was being gifted my consoles instead of going out and actually buying them. The Dreamcast was kind of the exception to that. Not that I didn't like my PS2. I loved it. One of my favorite consoles. So many good games on that. It was like a golden era of gaming. But I was always a little bit jealous that I couldn't play as Link. Especially because I had the N64 prior and I loved the shit out of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. But so we had guest characters. And we started getting an expanding roster of characters with a lot of clones. Like Cassandra to Sophidia. We had Rock, who was the progenitor for Astaroth, but now they fleshed him back out, so he made his return from Soul Edge. But this set a precedent that we were going to get guest characters. And I'm looking here. We had Soul Calibur 3, which came out then in 2005, and this one was same console generation, but it lacked the guest characters. They instead started to really advance the story of the game, whereas Soul Calibur and Soul Calibur 2 are kind of roughly in the same time period. A little bit of this is shortly thereafter, but 3 is where we really started to see things branch off, and we got a lot of new characters, fuck is her name? Tira and Zasalamel, who would really worm their way into becoming mainstays with the series. And this was one of the ones where I remember like really getting hyped up about it, because then they were going to introduce a character creator into it. And this was another huge development, and it's probably why we didn't have the guest characters in this iteration. But the creative character was one of the best features. I remember always going to friends' houses, and this was back in the day when you had your memory cards, and so you would store the game save on the memory card, but also your characters, and then you could copy your characters over to like your friend's memory card. And I did this a lot with my girlfriend at the time, where for whatever reason the game wouldn't let you, like, say you were doing a versus match, player 2 couldn't load characters from player 1's memory card, and so we would just essentially have to copy the memory cards, and she can make her own characters, and I would move over my save data, so like as I unlocked more armor pieces, she could customize her own characters. And it was just always fun, because this is when you started to see, you know, like, oh, I'm going to have a Ninja Turtle fight She-Ra and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. We then moved into the next generation of consoles with Soulcalibur IV in 2008. And this was where we had on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. And the Create a Soul returned, but with that came the guest characters. In this case, we had Star Wars. Star Wars characters had come to Soulcalibur 4, and it was broken, to say the least. The 3 characters we had were Yoda, Darth Vader, and then the Secret Apprentice from the Force Unleashed series. Now, Vader and Secret Apprentice were more fair, I guess you could say. They were more akin to other Soulcalibur fighters. But Yoda was just totally broken because he is 3 foot nothing. And this was the first title, I think, that introduced online multiplayer. And it's definitely the first one that I had where I was able to fight other people that weren't sitting in the living room with me. And this became probably my favorite in the series because of that. In addition, we also had my favorite character, Amy, get her full-fledged release. Like, Raphael had been introduced in Soulcalibur 2. He was a fencer, but I was still playing Nightmare pretty hard at the time. But when Soulcalibur 4 came out, Nightmare had changed quite a bit. At least in my opinion. He was roughly the same, but I couldn't jive with him. There was something off, and I couldn't get him to do what I wanted him to do. But Amy had stepped in, and this is where I started making that transition into smaller, lighter, faster characters, and she jived with me. And so we had a really, really good run. I loved Soulcalibur 4 because I'd be on Xbox 360 at fucking 2 in the morning playing with all these random people, and hearing not only the person I'm playing against yelling at me, quit doing the same fucking move over and over again, but also like their friends jeering them and cheering, and everybody having a good time. And then, of course, with it being an online game, you could show each other your created characters. So there were a lot of like Sephiroths and Cloud Strifes and Vincents and all those others. And it was, I consider it like the golden era of Soulcalibur. And then this is where we first get kind of our drought, the first big drought with Soulcalibur, to the point where we're wondering what's going on with the series, because fighting games hadn't really hit the big curve of their decline, but it was definitely starting. And it was going to be 4 years before we would see the next Soulcalibur. And in between Soulcalibur 4 and 5, we had that PSP game, and then the Wii game, which... I'm sorry. No. Yes? Oh, the Wii one was before 4. Okay. Anywho, there wasn't a lot of content. We then had Soulcalibur V come out, which promised a return to the series, but also this is where I think they kind of fucked the series up because while everything remained kind of the same, we're still on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. They decided to change things up quite a bit, and by quite a bit, I mean they butcher a story mode in the sense of we're going to introduce a whole lot of characters that folks really don't care about. They're essentially clones of mainstays. They're the apprentices and children of characters you've grown up and loved playing. It seemed a way to force the story forward, and folks, at least me, I didn't really care for it. I'm like, I don't like playing as these people. Amy was no longer a playable character. The story involving Sophidia's children fighting one another, and the introduction of one of the worst ideas ever, I think, was the Malfested. Trying to explain or expand upon the story of Soulcalibur. It wasn't handled very well. It was very melodramatic and very anime-ish, and I didn't like it. Not nearly as much as Soulcalibur IV, to the point where I went back and kept playing Soulcalibur IV online. But that was the last one we really had. They re-released Soulcalibur II in 2013. And then we had a PlayStation Network free-to-play game, which I didn't have a PlayStation at the time, so I skipped that. And then we had an iOS-only title. And nothing. Just nothing for a really long time. Until they finally announced that we were getting Soulcalibur VI. And based on what I had read, leading up to it, even the game designers and the developer weren't sure that they were going to make another Soulcalibur, so they kind of threw everything in the kitchen sink into this one. But they didn't actually throw everything in the kitchen sink into this one. Soulcalibur VI is a really competent fighting game. They did away with some of the more unnecessarily complex mechanics that got introduced in 4 and 5 and kind of streamlined it, taking cues from games like Street Fighter with super gauges and simplifying special combos and linking them to macro-like buttons. It made it easier to play, which then opened up the field to a lot more people. But at the same time, they really didn't bring much innovation or add anything new. Soulcalibur 6 is essentially a rehashing of the first Soulcalibur story, but they flesh it out and add in a couple characters, but at the same time, they gut the roster. Now, when you gut the roster of a game like this, it's not necessarily a bad thing because you are getting rid of a lot of clone characters. Where you would have 2 or 3 iterations of the same character, you're venturing dangerously into Mortal Kombat territory where you have there's a ninja for every color there is, but they all kind of play the same. Soulcalibur was definitely in that territory, and while it's good to trim the fat, it almost feels like what they wanted to make was a remastered version of the first Soulcalibur and try and flesh out the story a bit. And so we get that, but it doesn't feel like anything's too new with it. It plays very much the same as the previous Souls entries, because I've been playing it since, for 18 years now. Characters feel very much the same. I have no problem stepping back into the boots of Keelik or Nightmare. Astaroth's is still a gigantic pain in my ass, and sorry, this cough's terrible. But for the most part, it's very, very familiar, which isn't a bad thing, but again, we're not getting anything really new introduced into the game. I would almost like to see a tag mechanic introduced, but it's besides the point. You know what you're getting for it, and we have a couple different modes that introduce the story to us. Libra of Souls is the way where you create your own custom character, and you go through their own, I guess, series of events where it takes place during the first game, but you're meeting characters that are in the game, like your buddy with Maxie, and it makes me like him for the first time ever. You're palling around with the Ultra Edgelord Grohl, and it's it's a neat way of presenting it. Like, it's enjoyable to play. I've not beat it yet, and I've already dumped like 10 hours into this mode. You level up your character, you get items, and there's a tiny amount of RPG element, but it's mostly a mode that forces you into fights against characters that are stronger than you, introducing handicaps like slippery stages, or this attack is super ineffective, or you can only win the match if you beat them with this kind of attack. It forces you to play characters in a different way and opens up your play style. So, like, case in point, we had a new DLC character, 2B from Nier Automata, get released the other day, and I had been really, really wanting to play her and make her my main for this game. Playing through this Libra of Souls was a fantastic way for me to really learn the character, to the point where, up until now I had been playing as Raphael, sorry, and doing things like the online mode. I had yet to win a ranked match out of like the 20 I had tried. But with 2B, granted I was fighting another 2B, because I had dumped, at least 5 hours worth of game time into just playing her exclusively and having to work around all these different modes and figure out the mechanics of how she works. I went in and actually won my first ranked match. So, again, probably against somebody who's just as experienced as I am, but it felt good. So it's interesting. The story is very anime, very over the top, very melodramatic, and not super, I don't want to say engaging, but it's not good. Like, it could have been handled a lot better. It's silly, and the characters are stereotypes and awful and laughable. And we see this carry over into the main story mode where, rather than having you just play through the arcade mode with each character and, clear your traditional 10 stages and you get an opening cinematic and then a closing cinematic, it actually breaks down the story for each character, and you have, several missions each, and it's focused and it takes place during different time periods. And as you play through it all, it stitches the story together in a very cohesive way, if I cared about the story at all. So it's interesting, and as you play through one mode, you unlock additional content in the other mode, so you go back and play it. And then, of course, this awards you with the tokens that you can then use to purchase artwork from the old game. So the core concepts are all still there. I'm so sorry. Things like Create a Soul have returned, but there's nothing new. Like, literally, there is nothing new added. This is the exact same Create a Soul that we had from Soulcalibur 4 and 5. In fact, it's missing a lot of the content, like the DLC pack. So it's very disappointing. I'm hoping they add in more content to it. The community's super creative, and you can actually now browse other people's creations by the most recent and download them. Like, last night I got a Smurfette and Dr. Doom, which are really cool. But for the most part, it is what it is. If you've used it before, you're going to be comfortable with it now. Clothing still doesn't fit right on custom characters. It's all oversized and, floating about 3 inches off of them. The faces are generic and terrible. The voices are even more so. But when it comes down to actually fighting and playing the game, it remains as solid as ever. We've got a few, we've gotten 2 bits of DLC thus far with Tira, who launched with the game and should have been included with it being a core character. And then 2B, which, while I didn't love Nier Automata, I greatly enjoyed it. And so seeing her come into this with her own set of moves that play very closely to her home game It's gonna give myself a headache with these coughs. She's a lot of fun to play. She's refreshing, a nice breath of fresh air in this series. So I don't know. I mean, at this time, I've dumped probably 24. Actually, I can check Steam. I can actually check Steam. Library. Yeah, I've played 22 hours worth of it, and I don't know. It's good. It's fun. But I was hoping for something more, especially with how long we've had to wait. And on that, it's like, it's not bad. It's Soulcalibur, but it's not great. It's still my favorite fighting game franchise, especially after playing Street Fighter with Rachel. It makes me realize, what makes this series so unique and enjoyable. I love the history and the lore behind everything, and the fact that you're in the 1500s and you're fighting samurai and knights and Spartans and all this other stuff. It's a nice little trip. It puts you in a believable world, despite all the over-the-topness that's become more prevalent. But at the same time, they take turns with characters that you wouldn't expect. Like Mitsurugi he used to be the brooding, gruff master samurai, but now he's a bumbling idiot in this game. Astaroth, a character who traditionally never talked, is now a violent... he's always violent, but now he's obsessed with death, and they hint at his cult origins, but it's not really put in there. Ivy, who had vowed to destroy the evil soul-edged sword, ends up allying herself with Nightmare. And Nightmare himself is just a laughable joke. They went directions that didn't make sense to me. And then introduced a bunch of characters that I don't care about, like Aswell and Grow. So, I don't know. It's good. It's been on sale a couple times with consoles. PC, it just now went on sale for $40, but there have been issues. This most recent patch, until they rolled out the fix for it, was actually banning anybody who tried to play online. The PC version is full of cheaters who unlock characters that shouldn't be unlocked because they're overpowered, like Inferno, or allow them to spoof their own rating or ranking on the leaderboard, so it puts them at the top. But, and then I guess Xbox One players, there's a select group of them that have not been able to play online at all, and they're still trying to figure that out. So it's not without its flaws. Can I recommend it to somebody who's not really into Soulcalibur? Probably not. It's designed... or I should say its flaws are most forgiven by people who have been with it for a long time and weren't expecting to get another entry. But in comparison to other fighting games, I don't know how it stacks up, especially when you consider fighting games have kind of fallen away in popularity. So, I don't know. If you like fighting games and you're looking for something different, I'd say wait for it to go on a good sale. I don't know that it's fully worth the $60. Of course, I was going to get it because it's my favorite fighting game, but for everybody else, I don't know. But that's where we're going to have to leave it. If you have your own, questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, opinions, compliments, or otherwise just want to chat, you can send an email over to theunwashedasses@gmail.com. Again, theunwashedasses@gmail.com. And if you want to keep the show going, support us. All I ask is $1 a month. Pitch in $1 over at patreon.com/zeroand09. That's ZEROAND09. And if you can't afford $1, that's cool. Just please tell a friend. That's how this show grows, is you guys telling other folks about it. You can get the show wherever you get your other podcasts, but Until then, we're still working on an outro.